Good morning. Good afternoon. I've been here all day. It's afternoon now. Good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the House Committee on Public Safety. We don't have the ability to electronically take the roll today, so the clerk will call your name and you'll just answer in the affirmative if you're here. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we have enough folks to have a meeting.
Delegate Munden King.
Present.
Delegate Hope. Delegate Lopez.
Here.
Delegate Rasul.
Here.
Delegate Clark.
Here.
Delegate Helmer.
Here.
Delegate Siebold.
Here.
Delegate McClure. Delegate Cousins. Here. Delegate Thomas. Delegate Feggins.
Here.
Delegate Wilt. Here. Delegate Webbert.
Here.
Delegate Batten. Here. Delegate Cordoza.
Here.
Delegate Taylor. Delegate Ennis. Here. Delegate Oates. Here. Delegate Obenchain. Here. Delegate Owen. Here. Delegate Phillips. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. It looks like we have a quorum sufficient. We'll have some folks that are on their way down here. I know I've got word from a couple of folks that they're still on their way here, but respect for everybody's time and attendance, I want to go ahead and get things started and keep it moving here. As chairman of the House Public Safety Committee, I called this meeting today because there have been some media reports of some self-harm incidents among individuals at Virginia's correctional facilities, particularly the Red Onion facility. These incidents raise questions about the well-being of those entrusted to our care and the systemic conditions that may contribute to these incidents in our prisons. Today's hearing has really two primary goals. First, I'd like to provide the Department of Corrections an opportunity to offer transparency, share the facts of these incidents, and explain the measures that are already in place or plan to address them. Second, it allows us as a public safety committee to exercise a critical oversight role by digging deeper into the root causes of self-harm in our prison system. I want to sort of stop for a second there and say, the role of this committee is to conduct oversight. We're not an investigatory body. We don't do investigations. We're not a fact finder. We do try and, again, conduct some oversight. We'd like to hear about what happened, and we'll hear from a number of different groups. And then we try and address policy questions that we think may or may not be contributing and offer some solutions. And really, this wants to be a solution-oriented hearing. It's not about assigning blame or looking for anybody to castigate or punish necessarily, but to find out what's going on in our prison system and make sure that we are doing the best we can to take care of those Virginians that are in our care and custody, even if it's in a situation where they're incarcerated. The way we have an agenda here, and the way I'd like to sort of have this go, if we can, is we're going to get a presentation from Mr. Dodson on behalf of the Department of Corrections. If members can sort of hold their questions and let that presentation go through, there will be an opportunity for everybody to ask questions, and every question that we want answered, I'm assured, will be answered. We'll then have some presentations by Jerry Greenspan from the American Civil Liberties Union, by Taj Mahone-Haft from the Humanization Project, and by Kenneth Hunter on behalf of Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. Then I'll have the Department of Corrections folks, if they're available, come back up, and we'll have an opportunity to sort of respond to what we hear from the advocates and have questions and answers from the committee members. So again, I want to have a robust discussion, but I sort of want to lay out all the different issues and get as much information out on the table as we can first before we get into Q&A, so that it goes at a sort of orderly pace that way. I do have also, not on the agenda, but joining us today is our newly appointed ombudsman, Corrine Loudon. And Corrine's here, and we may give her a chance at some point to introduce herself to some committee members. We'll figure out if there's an appropriate time to plug her in, because I think that the role of the ombudsman is going to be something that may turn out to be important. Like I said, we do oversight here, but if we're looking for investigations and things like that, that might be something we can loop in our new ombudsman on. So with that, Mr. Dodson, if you're prepared to go first, we'll let you take the floor. Oh, then, but at the very end of that, we'll have an opportunity for public comment too. I know we have some folks that are signed up online, and if there's anybody in the room that wants to comment, there'll be a chance at the end before we adjourn for public comment as well. Mr. Dodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I do have a slideshow that I'm going to run through pretty quickly. It's not, we're not going to dwell on all of it, but there's some things that may be interested to know. Essentially, what I'm going to address, the reason why we're here. But before we get to that, I want to sort of talk about a little bit about the context of what Red Onion is, because I think it's important for everyone on this committee to understand what Red Onion is. Back in April, I wrote a personal letter to each of you inviting you to come visit Red Onion State Prison. Some of you taking me up on that. I appreciate that. Some of you reached out trying to get it scheduled. Appreciate that. Still welcome to come, because I want you to see what Red Onion State Prison is. And for those that haven't been able to make it yet, I brought a little bit of Red Onion to you here today. I'm from Wise County originally. I was a circuit court judge in Wise County, where Red Onion and Wallens Ridge are. I have Been acquainted with Red Onion really my whole professional career. Now, as we have these conversations in the next few weeks and months, and ongoing conversations now with the Oversight Committee, I think it's important we have sort of a baseline about what Red Onion is. So quickly, Virginia Department of Corrections, our recidivism rate, this is brand new, 17.6% as the most recent one, still among the top. CBS this weekend, reported a nationwide average of 60%, to give you some context about Virginia. Now, Red Onion State Prison serves a vital role in our Commonwealth's overall public safety mission. I believe this deeply. Virginia has the safest prison system anywhere in the country. We have fewer incidents. And a big part of that is because of our classification system. Our classification system classifies the inmates based on a risk and needs analysis, helps us deliver exactly what program they need before they're released, and assigns them to prisons based upon their behavior and their propensity for violence. The vast majority of individuals incarcerated in the Virginia Department of Corrections are serving their time, trying to improve themselves, trying to go home, not causing anyone any problem. But for those that are the most violent offenders that refuse to behave, Virginia has to have secure facilities in which to house them. I mean, we live in a world that needs men and women who are willing to step up, take responsibility for those that are the most violent offenders. And you call them corrections officers, I call them heroes. They go to work every single day at these facilities under conditions that would be difficult for the rest of us. So the population at Red Onion, there are at any given time around 776 inmates at Red Onion State Prison. That's 3% of the total VA-DOC population. 88% of inmates at Red Onion have a violent conviction. They're serving for a violent offense. 34% murder, 25% robbery. There are 32 rapists. Inmates at Red Onion are serving long sentences. 14% are serving one or more life sentences. The remaining 86% of inmates have an average sentence of 27 and a half years. The median sentence for Red Onion inmates is 75% longer than the median sentence at other facilities. Red Onion, and again, this is context for what we're going to talk about, manages inmates whose behavior has disrupted the safety and security of our other institutions. They come from every other institution into Red Onion. 82% have more than 10 convictions for disciplinary offenses just during their current term of incarceration. 57 inmates there have more than 50 convictions, and on average, inmates at Red Onion have 33 convictions for disciplinary offenses while incarcerated. Now, this is Red Onion. We have external audits take place all the time, 100% compliance at just Red Onion. I won't go too more into this. I will answer any questions you have later about any of this, but I want to try to run through this. Our staffing at Red Onion is, as of December 5th, it was a 9% overall vacancy rate, but as of December 16th, just this morning, it's a 5% vacancy rate at Red Onion. Red Onion is a well-staffed facility. Our statewide rate, vacancy rate is 18.3%. So this is our people in Southwest Virginia step up to the plate at Red Onion and Wallens Ridge. All staff are, not all staff are trained in managing and de-escalating incidents, but also we train some staff in what's called corrections crisis intervention team training. And essentially this is, the intent is to understand, to recognize and to discuss techniques and skills needed for dealing with individuals who are in mental health crisis, and essentially communication de-escalation techniques. This is an evidence-based program that has shown, the research shown that it leads to decline in negative encounters with individuals in crisis, a decrease in use of force incidents, decrease in staff injuries, and more trust. Too much here to get into, but inmate medical care, is taken care of at every facility we have. Now, I started out talking about the context of the inmate population there. That was not as an excuse to say we don't need to deliver the programming they need. It's just for context, you understand who is housed there. We provide education programs, distance education for those that are in our restorative housing we'll talk about in a moment. There's a full-time distance education teacher responsible for this cohort. Now, we need to recognize that many of the inmates don't have a positive mindset towards the educational program. It makes it difficult. And that also has a profound impact on our ability to do what we're doing at some other places, which is using tutors and aides, other inmates as peer support, which is found to be successful. But now, again, that doesn't absolve us of our responsibility. Starting in January, we're launching the READ program, the REAL program, Reading Enables All Learning, specifically at Red Onion to try to help. It's hard to get a GED if you can't read, if you can't. And 1/3 of the population at Red Onion reads at a second grade level or lower. Half reads at 5th grade level or lower. So we can't start talking about the other things to help improve. But data does show that every grade level we can help them move forward has an effect on recidivism rates. So there's, enrollments. Counseling services. We have a number of counseling programs, both mental health and substance abuse, and really thinking for a change is a big one as well, for just changing that criminal thinking. All these are evidence-based. Understand as well, something that we've sort of not talked about here is, but we have a 67% of our population has substance use disorder. We're dealing with a number of individuals that are dealing with addiction issues that we have to deal in addition to these educational issues. So restorative housing, as we get into the discussion about the incidents we talked about. Restorative housing, listen, I have no reason to defend the restorative housing program. I didn't start it, didn't come on my watch. I showed up, it's already in place. But what I've discovered as I've done a deep dive into it upon being appointed to be the director of the Virginia Department of Corrections is this is a model that other states are looking at and that is effective in managing behavioral issues. We have RHUs at every facility, level 2 and above. It's a temporary housing assignment, specifically to address behavioral issues. Example, 2 guys get into a fight. You split them up, it's temporary to fix that. The average length of stay in restorative housing ranges from 9 days to 2 weeks generally. It's short term to address behavioral issues. But while they're there, they're not just locked down in a cell. They have access to our multidisciplinary team, which includes a unit manager, includes mental health, medical, education. They're able to get their education program while in RHU. They meet with the inmate to establish a plan. How do we get you back out of here and back into the general population, which is what we want. We don't want anyone in restorative housing. So each case is a case-by-case analysis. Each case we look at to determine what does this individual need to help them be successful. We do audits quarterly. These are internal audits, internal to DOC, but external to Red Onion, for example. People come from other facilities to do audits, just to interview inmates, to staff, to talk about best practices, review program elements for compliance. And you can see here the number of completions during the last 6 years. Completions, I mean they leave RHU, which is what we want. Now the step-down program is for inmates with an established history of demonstrated violence that resulted in injury or death. These are inmates who we consider to be a serious threat to staff and other inmates. It focuses on risk reduction and risk control, but similarly, we have a multidisciplinary team that meets with each one of these individuals about how they can safely and responsibly progress to general population setting, evaluate what the actual needs are of the individuals. We have certainly basically continuous reviews of each case by the subject matter experts that work for us. We have a lot of great correctional officers, I'm proud of it, but we have mental health staff. We have substance use staff. We have people who are literally subject matter experts to determine if placement's appropriate. The inmates are invited to participate in that process as well. So those are the things that we're talking about when we talk about restorative housing, step down. But I also want to talk about this, because this is since I got to the Department of Corrections. By the end of the year, we're going to have almost twice as many transfers away from Red Onion as we had in previous years. And the reason why is we're trying, we're going to talk about these incidents, some of them because they want to get away from Red Onion. I'm giving you a way to get away from Red Onion. Behave. We send them mostly back to Sussex, which is often much closer to family and friends. Behave well. We'll get you out. I love the mountains. I'm from Southwest Virginia, but I understand why you'd want to get closer to family. We want to encourage that. You can misbehave and try to force it like we saw with these others, or you can behave, and we'll get you there. It's a pathway to leaving Red Onion. And it's part of a bigger conversation we'll be having in the coming months about incentive-based corrections. Mental health services, not going to go through all this, but 65% of our current population at Red Onion has some degree of mental health impairment. Individuals identified as at risk for self-directed violence, what I think a lot of people call self-harm, or for suicidal ideation. Those behaviors are enhanced monitoring. And these are all the mental health group programs that are available at Red Onion State Prison. Just not true that we're not providing programming. Now, these incidents that we're here to talk about, there were 6 of them beginning in March, basically from March to October. There's no evidence whatsoever that there was any kind of a plot or any kind of a protest. They each had individual reasons for doing what they did. Well, there's one. There are 2. One appears to be a copycat of another one because it was from a cellmate. All the inmates were seen by medical staff. Some of them did have to go out to a burn unit and came back. All the inmates involved said they did it because they wanted to get away from Red Onion. 2 of these had been previously routinely seen by mental health staff. 2 of them had a prior history of self-directed violence. I keep wanting to say self-harm, and my mental health staff's redirecting me to what the current terminology is. They were all taken to external providers. The only evidence that there's some kind of big plot is that someone ginned it up on the internet. One of our inmates, who I'm happy to talk about if you all want to talk about him. Inmates who don't like the repercussions for their bad behavior are going to continue to complain about Red Onion State Prison. And I hope you all come look. I hope the ombudsman comes and looks, and we're happy to show our work. You can believe the evidence. You can believe the analysis from inmates who don't like repercussions for their bad behavior. There are no conditions. Keep hearing the term conditions. There are no conditions that they're truly protesting other than being up in the mountains and away from their family and friends, and it being harder for them to manipulate staff and harder for them to smuggle in contraband. Those are the only conditions that are present down there. So I guess I'll leave everything else for later, and we can have a question and answer later. I appreciate the opportunity to clear the record a little bit and to answer your questions. I again want to offer you each. You don't have to tell me you're coming to Red Onion. Show up. They'll let you in. We don't have to roll out the red carpet for you. When we get a chance for people to see what our staff does every day, we come out of this looking golden. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't want to continue to have a conversation about how do we improve the process. And that's why I'm here and why I'm cooperating with the ombudsman. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dodson. And I was taking some notes. And so, yeah, thank you for sticking around for questions. Like I said, I just want to sort of lay things out. And we'll hear from some other folks, and then we'll have you back up for questions. Okay?
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. So next on the agenda is Jerry Greenspan. He's the senior staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union. She.
Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jerry Greenspan. I'm Senior Staff Attorney at the ACLU of Virginia and a member of the legal team representing the plaintiffs in the class action lawsuit Thorpe versus the Virginia Department of Corrections, which challenges the constitutionality of the step-down program that operates at Red Onion State Prison. Thank you for inviting us here today to provide comment. While we have no independent information about the recent incidents of self-harm at Red Onion that have been featured in the news, the prison conditions and the actions of VDOC's staff that were reported in those news accounts of these incidents are consistent with what we have heard from dozens of our clients over the last 6 years about the conditions in the step-down program at Red Onion. Since 2012, hundreds of prisoners in VDOC custody have been placed in the step-down program, where they have been subject to indefinite and long-term solitary confinement. The conditions there are incredibly harsh and harmful to prisoners' physical and mental health. I want to stress that these conditions have persisted over many years, multiple lawsuits, and multiple wardens. It is clear that this is a systemic problem, not just the result of a few bad apples. And in the last year, VDOC's own data shows that more people are ending up in these most restrictive conditions. VDOC's most recent restorative housing report indicates that the number of people in the step-down program had more than doubled, or had nearly doubled over the past year up till the end of June, but according to the slide presentation we just saw, it has now more than doubled since the end of June of 2023. And the number of people in all forms of restorative housing as of the end of June of this year went from 259 to 397. And that number does not even include people in other units like the newly created Alt General Population Unit that we understand is also managed similarly to restorative housing. So what is it like in these units? I'll describe just some of what we've learned about Red Onion during the course of our litigation. First, by policy, people in the most restrictive phases, or in most phases of the step-down program, are only entitled to 4 hours out of cell per day. And little to none of that time is spent with other people. In practice, prisoners are frequently denied that time, whether by staff who arbitrarily deny it, or because inclement weather prevents outside recreation, or during regular quarterly shakedowns that can last 7 days or more when everyone is denied out of cell time. When they are offered out of cell time, prisoners must first endure a humiliating strip search each time they leave their cell, after which they are placed in full restraints. They are then subject to the intimidating presence of canines as they are escorted from their cell to a small, bare, outdoor recreation cage where they are again held alone with no exercise equipment or means of actual recreation for the duration of their out-of-cell time. Such isolated out-of-cell time does nothing to alleviate the risks and harms of the step-down program or of solitary confinement. And second, in most phases of the step-down program, prisoners have no access to educational programs, group treatment programs, or employment opportunities. They are allowed very limited property in their cell, and this creates a situation where people are forced into idleness, sitting alone in their cells, staring at the walls for most of every day. All of our plaintiffs in our lawsuit spent several years in these conditions. Some of them spent close to 20 years in solitary confinement. Here's how one of our plaintiffs described the impact of his time in the step-down program. Quote, "I was tired of living like this, which was not really living. I was not in touch with my family, I could not use the phone or have visits, and the isolation plus the unfairness of my situation all built on each other. I began to think about suicide as the only way out." Another one of our plaintiffs had never suffered from mental illness before being put in the step-down program, but soon after being subjected to these conditions, he, quote, "began to feel like an essential part of me was missing. It felt like a void, like something was empty inside me. I lost all interest in activities and people that I used to love." We know from the scientific literature that even relatively brief exposure to conditions that severely restrict positive social interactions and environmental stimulation cause serious and long-lasting, and sometimes permanent, mental and physical health problems, including depression, anxiety, lethargy, sleep disturbance, hypertension, pain, paranoia, hallucinations, dissociative experience, PTSD, rage and aggression, decreased life expectancy, suicidal ideation, and self-harm. Even though these effects are well known and well established, VDOC provides drastically inadequate mental health care at Red Onion. There is no individual or group counseling or therapy available to people in the step-down program. The only mental health treatment VDOC provides is medications. And to get it, people must often submit multiple requests and wait months to even see the psychiatrist. Even after people begin to experience negative impacts from the conditions of confinement, VDOC refuses to make any modifications or accommodations unless and until someone deteriorates to the point where they require commitment in VDOC's psychiatric facility. This is especially troubling since many people placed in the step-down program already have pre-existing mental illnesses like major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, and schizoaffective disorder, all of which are considered serious mental illnesses and which make people with those diagnoses particularly susceptible to the harmful effects of solitary confinement. And on top of the extreme isolation that people experience in the step-down program, we also hear consistent reports of abuses by staff. Over and over, these reports include physical abuse and verbal abuse like racist epithets, threats of violence, and personal attacks. For example, one of our plaintiffs, who is Muslim and observes Ramadan, was once told to, quote, strap a bomb to yourself and kill yourself by a corrections officer. Another one of our plaintiffs, who is Black, reports that multiple officers have called him the N-word. Officers also told him that he, quote, should eat bananas and was, quote, dreaming about picking cotton. And these are the sorts of comments that, most of our clients report hearing, having directed at them. Such incidents are regularly reported by prisoners both to us and to VDOC, but we see little evidence that VDOC meaningfully investigates or addresses them. Instead, what we've consistently heard from our clients for years is that if they complain about officers, whether by filing grievances or participating in lawsuits, they will experience retaliation. Many of our clients have reported that officers have harassed and intimidated them while referencing their conversations with counsel, grievances they have filed, or litigation. This harassment includes the intentional destruction of their personal property and legal papers, whether by tearing them, stomping on them, throwing water on them. One of our clients lost the only photograph he had of his deceased brother when an officer urinated on it during a retaliatory shakedown of his cell. Officers also frequently file baseless disciplinary charges that can extend people's stay in solitary confinement by months or even years. These harsh conditions are not only inhumane, they are unconstitutional, and VDOC knows this. Our current class action lawsuit is not the first to challenge conditions like this in VDOC facilities. In 2019, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed a trial court's ruling in favor of prisoners on Virginia's death row, that conditions there violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. This case is called Porter versus Clark. The conditions on death row in that case were substantially similar to the conditions in which prisoners are held in the step-down program at Red Onion. Yet despite this remarkable indictment of VDOC's practices by a federal appeals court, no material changes have been made to improve conditions in the step-down program, nor has VDOC made any changes to the policies or practices governing the step-down program since this legislature enacted Code Section 53.1-39.2 governing restorative housing units, which took effect in July of 2023. Because the department has refused for so long to make any meaningful change at Red Onion, it is clear that VDOC cannot be left to police itself. We believe that an independent investigation into these conditions, including how VDOC investigates and responds to allegations of misconduct, is both warranted and necessary. We encourage this committee to call for the Corrections Ombudsman's Office to investigate the conditions of confinement and culture of staff abuses at Red Onion, pursuant to its statutory authority, including investigating why VDOC's own internal policies and practices have failed to remedy these conditions and have allowed them to persist for so many years. We offer any assistance in these efforts that we might be able to provide, and I'm also happy to answer any questions that members of the committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, and you'll stick around as well if there are questions?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, next on the agenda is Taj Mahone-Haft. Am I saying your name correctly? If not, correct me. And go ahead and
It's Taj Mahone-Haft.
Sorry, Taj. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, esteemed members of the committee. I I'm Taj Manhaf, Director of the Immunization Project. We are here today because 6 people harmed themselves intentionally. So thank you for bringing attention and action to a human tragedy, because no matter what people have done in the past, these are Virginians who feel so desperate that the only thing they felt that would work was harming themselves. That is always tragic. So thank you. I stand before you here both concerned and hopeful. Concerned about the well-being of these human beings, because, like I said, they're Virginians, just like the rest of us. I'm also hopeful because here we are, acting on this all together as stakeholders from what are often different sides, seeking to make sure that people in this tragic situation are helped. That's hopeful. And so I guess my number one request on behalf of myself, our organization, and whenever we can, as best we can, those impacted people, loved ones, people behind bars, people who have been behind bars, that the first thing we do is focus on making sure that those people are helped. And so let's have some answers today on what specifically those individuals, what is being done to help them right now to make sure that they do not harm themselves. Again, even if it is a choice of self-harm, what can we do to make that not happen? Because I think that the human side of this has been lost in a lot of the rhetoric. The definition of self-immolation, or the philosophical basis for those organizations that are advocating on behalf of these people, that's not the point here. The point is that there are Virginians who are harming themselves intentionally because they find themselves in such desperate circumstances and feeling so desperate that this is the only thing that they think they can do. All other things aside. So we ask, please, let's start there. Let's find answers here and in an ongoing fashion of what is being done with these specific situations. But I also want to take this human focus beyond just those 6 individuals that have harmed themselves recently, that have made the news and brought this attention, to the broader picture of avoiding self-harm in the first place. Because let's look at this as an opportunity to learn more about what leads to self-harm, not just with them, but with anybody in the system under care of the state, and establishing proactive ways to work together to avoid that in the future, because this is not an isolated, or these 6 are not isolated incidents. The thing is, self-harm occurs at all facilities, in jails and prisons across the state, not just those in question. Anywhere where we find people feeling isolated for extended periods of time, anywhere we find people kept in extreme isolation, you find self-harm. I'm going to bring a human lesson. Yesterday, I spent the day at Nikki Giovanni's funeral, probably one of the best Virginians ever. And 2 of the lessons, certainly the best teacher I've ever had, and 2 of the lessons that came out of what was said at that funeral really apply today. And I thought about this, and as I did, and knowing her, not only would she want her lessons to be used in these moments, she believed in the power of words for change, but also she would want her name associated with these lessons in this moment. She was never afraid of being honest about helping people. So 2 of those lessons from Nikki: the importance of seeing humanity and connecting with people on human grounds. Everybody who came and spoke, people much smarter and more eloquent than me, spoke about how that was a lesson they learned from her. And in her own poem, When I Die, she says, "Touching was and still is and will always be the true revolution," meaning touching each other, connecting on a human level. And then in 2 of her other famous poems, the lesson of the importance of staying connected during crisis. At times like this, she wrote after Maya Angelou died, "At times like this, we are sad, we gather, we comfort each other." And after the tragic shooting at Virginia Tech, she most famously said, "We are Virginia Tech." The common thread there is we. In times of crisis, we is how we get through things, right? Imagine, we've all had crises. Yes, being in prison is self-induced, But we've all had crises, moments, job, health-related, our kids, our families, something we can't control. And the thing we always all do in those moments is connect with somebody we love, somebody we care about. Now imagine, in whatever crises you've experienced, be it mental health, addiction, or even finding yourself in prison, these other things are going on and you can't. There's no sunshine, there's no hugs, there's no conversations, everything that Jerry just described, all of those conditions. Imagine trying to face the toughest crises of your life when that is the context. So yeah, that leads people to do incredibly outrageous things like self-harm. And it's not just burning ourselves, it's with blades, it's banging our heads against the walls, it's acting out in ways that bring negative attention and disciplinary action often when we feel so isolated, so alone, so desperate that nothing else except something different. That means people are in crisis, that means people need help. And I can speak to this. Never before and never since, but when I spent an extended period of time in isolation during my own incarceration, I was ready to kill myself. But I will also say that finding ways to let those connections happen matter and help, because I will also say that Nikki, writing me back and forth during that time, was one of the things that got me through. Finding connections in these moments of crisis can avoid self-harm, right? So let's do that. So on a practical level, I think the first big thing we ask is let's use this ombudsman's office, this great thing that the legislature put together and that the department, the agency has absolutely supported. Director Dotson just said so himself. Let's look, but not just first at these specific issues. Let's look at the broader issue of self-harm as it relates to extreme isolation, extended isolation. That's where we should start, because we already know, as has already been discussed to a certain extent, but beyond those stats that were already mentioned, the portion of people that are spending more than 14 straight days, the amount of time that permanent damage can be done that the UN considers torture in Virginia's prisons in extended isolation has gone up 37% in the last 3 years. At the same time, more self-harm is occurring. We also know from broader studies that people in isolation are 6 to 7 times as likely to commit acts of self-harm and suicide. And that even after they get out, they're 55% more likely to commit suicide if they spend time in extended isolation. This is a root cause we know abstractly, but let's take the ombudsman's office. Let's take all of our resources, all of us working together, and let's immediately make this priority, this connection between self-harm and extended isolation, one of the first things we study so we can figure out how to avoid it. Because no Virginians should ever feel so desperate that the best thing that they can come up with is hurting themselves. That's not okay. And in the meantime, while this study happens, let's all work together to find practical solutions while that's happening. In the meantime, yes, let's get stakeholders together. Maybe this committee could call upon advocates and officers and members of the agency on a broader level, faith leaders, and yourselves, and talk quarterly. That's what we would ask. Regular conversations where all stakeholders are talking about how we can avoid together future self-harm. And specific to these particular instances, yeah, there has been, in our role working with the impacted community, we hear a lot of reports, people talking about things specifically at those facilities. And there are certainly good people working in those facilities. They are civil servants like yourselves, like all of us here. We care about well-being, right? So let's get together, let's study those specific facilities and find out what is and is not really going on, because this is important. This is what the ombudsman's office is for, to really investigate these things. But in both of these cases, on the broader issue of self-harm and extended isolation, and in these specific instances, let's not just leave it at what do officials say? Let's ask the people who feel this kind of desperation. Let's make sure when we're studying with transparency and openness that the voices of those who have committed self-harm, who are feeling so desperate, are part of that conversation. That part of that transparency includes their take, and that guides part of where we go. And in a last call for action, I ask that this committee and those of us who've spoken today from all different angles of this, that to Director Dotson's point, that the agency not only invite, but let's have a collective visit with all of the stakeholders. And again, not just seeing what's there, but getting to speak to those whose concerns we are hearing and concerns we want to address. Let's make sure that all of the voices, when we go have this visit, are accessible so that all of us can learn really what's going on. And I'll say this is not just for those people behind bars, or not even just for the other advocates and those who love people behind bars, but this is a public safety thing. Hurt people hurt people. If we want people to come out back to our communities and be the best people possible, to not have trauma, to not be carrying violence in themselves, whether it's directed at themselves or others, we need to heal people while they're in there. And when you're feeling like the only thing you can do is hurt yourself, you are not on the way to healing. So let's do this for the sake of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate those concrete suggestions. We may have an opportunity again to discuss how we can maybe turn some of those suggestions into reality here in a second. Next is Kenneth Hunter, and he's here on behalf of himself, but also on behalf of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Kenneth Hunter. I am an organizer for the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, more specifically the Virginia Consensus for Higher Education in Prison, which is an initiative that is aimed at expanding access to college programs for people who are incarcerated. I stand before you today with a shared interest that unites us all, ensuring the safety and well-being of everyone within our prison systems. It is with deep concern that I address the serious allegations of abuse and mistreatment at Red Onion State Prison. The Virginia Interfaith Center, an organization of 20,000 individuals from diverse faiths and people of goodwill across our state, advocate for economic, racial, and social justice in Virginia's policies and practices, including making Virginia's prisons fairer and more compassionate. We have worked with many of you in this room to abolish the death penalty, to reduce the use of solitary confinement, to limit the use of attack dogs, and advocate the DOC takeover of the Lawrenceville Correctional Center. And we are grateful for the steps forward that Virginia has made, and we appreciate a blossoming relationship with Director Chad Dotson, who has kept an open line of communication as we work to provide more educational opportunities in DOC. I was incarcerated in the Virginia Department of Corrections. I spent 22 years for a nonviolent drug offense. I spent the first few years from 2002 to 2005 in Red Onion. I was 23 years old. I had just recently been sentenced to more time in prison than I had been on the earth. And the first prison I was sent to was Red Onion. Through my own personal experience and communication with individuals and their families from Red Onion, I have a profound understanding of the prison's troubled history. Red Onion State Prison, a supermax facility, which opened in 1998, was designed to manage those deemed to be the worst of the worst within the state's correctional system. The prison's stringent security measures and isolated location in Wise County reflect its purpose of containing individuals who pose significant threats to public safety. As Governor Jim Gilmore stated during the prison's inauguration, quote, "Red Onion represents our commitment to maintaining public safety by ensuring that the most dangerous offenders are securely confined." This facility's creation underscores Virginia's approach to handling high-risk prisoners through maximum security and control. However, I'm somewhat of a contradiction, considering the time I spent there and my charges. I also would like to add, I spent 3 years in solitary confinement. It is by far the worst experience of my life. And its effects are lasting. Because even as I stand here, I have a moment of tension inside me. hopeful for the relationships that we've built, hopeful for the idea that we would have a working relationship, but also knowing what this experience is really like and what we are offering as a solution for managing people who we already know are troubled. I know there are disagreements about the severity and purpose of people burning themselves at Red Onion. Regardless of the details of the situation, though, we know that long-term solitary confinement has severe and lasting effects on mental and physical health. And we know that RHU is used all over the state in different facilities. Somehow, restrictive housing units are different at Red Onion than any of the other institutions who have these very same units. Prolonged isolation often leads to psychological issues such as depression, anxiety, hallucinations. The lack of social interaction and environmental stimulation can cause cognitive decline and emotional instability. Physically, individuals may experience deteriorating health due to limited activity and inadequate medical care. The stress and trauma associated with solitary confinement can also result in long-term behavioral challenges, making reintegration into society extremely challenging. Overall, the practice raises significant ethical and human rights concerns, highlighting the need for more humane alternatives in this correctional system. We know that the department produces an annual report on its use of solitary confinement, and we understand that it keeps track of self-harm done in prison. So we urge the committee to ask for a study that looks at the relationship between those who are kept in solitary confinement for long periods and self-harm, like what we've recently seen at Red Onion. We also believe that the ombudsman and the new oversight committee should investigate what has occurred at Red Onion, including examining this connection that I just mentioned. And as we address these concerns and look toward the future, we must also focus on expanding access to higher education programs for incarcerated individuals. See, education is a powerful tool for rehabilitation and reintegration into society, offering purpose and hope. Research has found that prisons with college programs are safer, with fewer violent infractions, making a safer environment for people who are incarcerated and also those who work there. Access to higher education in prison can significantly contribute to safer institutions by fostering a more positive and rehabilitative environment. Educational programs provide incarcerated people with valuable skills and knowledge, which can reduce idle time and decrease the likelihood of even engaging in disruptive behavior. Education also promotes personal growth, self-esteem, helping those incarcerated develop a sense of purpose and hope for the future. Studies have shown that incarcerated people who participate in educational programs are less likely to reoffend, leading to lower recidivism rates, even lower than the ones we have now in Virginia. This not only enhances the safety and security within the prison, but it also benefits society as a whole by preparing returning citizens for successful reintegration into our Commonwealth. Overall, higher education is a powerful tool for creating a more constructive and even peaceful correctional environment. And that is why we were encouraged to see the issuing of Executive Order 36 by Governor Youngkin, which formally established the Stand Tall, Stay Strong, and Succeed Together initiative. This initiative is a comprehensive, data-driven approach aimed at supporting reentry success and preventing recidivism among returning citizens. It emphasizes the importance of employment and education, health insurance, and other support services for individuals incarcerated. By expanding assessments, improving treatment programs, and fostering strong partnerships, all things that can help in managing some of the most troubled prisoners. More than 14,000 people incarcerated in Virginia's prisons are academically eligible to enroll in college degree programs, but only about 600 have the opportunity. Expanding this access to higher education is a valuable opportunity to offer people in prison, including those at Red Onion, hope and purpose. In conclusion, I reiterate our shared commitment to safe and humane prisons. I urge immediate action to investigate what has occurred at Red Onion. A study of the connection between long-term isolation and self-harm, and renewed commitment to expanding higher education in our prisons. Together, we can work towards a more just and compassionate correction system in Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're sort of through the predetermined presentations. Before we get to questions, for the committee members have questions, please use your request to speak light, and I'll recognize you. I have my screen over here, and I can do that. Mr. Dodson, if you wouldn't mind resuming the podium for just a second, and whoever else you want to bring with you is fine. I want to focus for just a second, though, on the things that I think we all agree on before we start to get into some of the stuff we might not agree on, which is I think I've heard you say, I think I heard the ACLU say, I think I heard the Humanization Project, I think I heard Virginia Interfaith say that everybody would like to have the Ombudsman's office do an investigation into a couple of things, but one specifically the incident, and then two, this connection between what's happening in the step-down program and if there's a relationship between that and self-harm. Would you guys have any objection if we were to ask the Ombudsman's office to conduct such an investigation?
I'll say this. Governor Youngkin signed that bill last year establishing the Ombudsman's office. I recommended the governor that he sign it. We don't fear it. We're cooperating fully with the law and with the Ombudsman.
Gotcha. And I see the Ombudsman is shaking her head in the affirmative that that's something that they can probably take on. I know it's a new office and you haven't yet had an opportunity to set up the process for exactly how we're going to task y'all, but we can get together, I think, and work that part of it out. All right, does anybody have any questions? I have some, but I'd rather defer to members of the committee. So if you guys can use your little yellow speak light, I'll set up a queue, and I'm happy to recognize anybody who's got questions for Mr. Dodson.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to note I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. If you guys want to just sort of generally respond to what you heard too, we can, however you want to do it.
I will. I have some general thought, but I did want to just mention that if you had any questions, this is Greg Holloway. He's our regional operations chief for the West. He's responsible. He knows Red Onion way better than I'm ever going to know it. And this is Dr. Denise Malone, who's our mental health director within the department. If there are any questions about those, I want to make sure they're here and available to you. I think the response that I would have, Mr. Chairman, if that's appropriate, there's some things I can say and some things I can't say. The ACLU knows that I'm a named defendant in the litigation they talk about quite a bit.
Right. Given that there's active litigation, you're probably limited, and your attorneys would probably be upset with you. If I were your attorney, I'd probably tell you to limit what you had to say, so I understand. We'll take that caveat.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to our day in court on that case. We've heard a lot here today about, quote unquote, long-term solitary confinement. And there's a reason that they're using that word. It's to connect in your mind with something that happened 20, 30, 50 years ago. There is no long-term solitary confinement in the Virginia Department of Corrections right now. You can't talk about what happened in 2018 even and compare it to what we're doing here today. And I would note that what we're doing here today, come look at it, but it's the same thing that was codified by this body just 2 years ago. That's what we're doing with restorative housing. There was some discussion about out-of-cell time, and we get everyone their out-of-cell time. But again, I come back to the Red Onion's different. Red Onion's just different. When I was appointed to the circuit court bench, my very first day on the bench, there was a case on the docket, a capital murder case from Red Onion, where an inmate was able to, even though they were separated outside, was able to kill another inmate. He was ultimately executed for that. That was my very first day. I think about that a lot. It's our responsibility, it's my responsibility, Mr. Chairman, to ensure the safety and security of my staff, absolutely 100%, but also every inmate that's there. There are a bunch of individuals incarcerated around the onion that are trying to improve, trying to get out of there if they want to. We want to support that. We don't want them to get injured either. So I guess I would say is when we talk about RHU, I'm happy to let you see how it actually works rather than listening to some of the comments that were sort of thrown out here today that I think you'll find it have no basis in reality. Other states that have removed some sort of RHU process, we've seen violence go way up. and I'm sorry, it's violence on staff and on inmates. If you're going to ask me to advocate a policy that's going to cause staff or inmates to get hurt, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. So I could pick out some other individual things, but I think I'm just going to leave it there.
Understood. All right, so we've got some folks that have queued up to speak, and I'll get to everybody here. So Delegate Cousins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Dotson, good to see you. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your time. Also like to thank you for being responsive to my emails and calls when I've reached out to you. And thanks to everyone who's here, all the advocates. I think we've heard some good solutions today. Mr. Hunter, I want to thank you for sharing your personal experience as well. So my question is just about mental health treatment. So you mentioned, I think the slide that you showed indicated that 65% of folks who are incarcerated have some form of a mental health condition, and 3 who have serious mental impairments. And so I noticed that there are these different classifications in your operating procedures that sort of classify someone as either minimal or mild impairment, all the way up to folks who have like substantial or severe impairment. And so in reading that, it seems that people who have severe impairment are required to receive some sort of involuntary acute care. So I'm just wondering if when people who come in and who undergo this mental health screening, especially considering this large population of 65% of incarcerated individuals who have these mental health conditions. So if someone presents and in the screening, perhaps they're diagnosed with major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder, maybe general anxiety disorder, and they're not exhibiting behaviors that require acute care, what steps is the DOC taking to sort of mitigate the compounding factors that can happen when someone presents with those conditions when they don't require acute care? Just wondering what sort of happens along the path to prevent someone who presents with a condition before they get all the way up to severe impairment needing acute care. So I'm hoping you can answer that question. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Delegate, and thank you as well for coming to visit our prisons and your very active engagement with the Department of Corrections. Really appreciate that. I'm going to, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, actually turn that question over to Dr. Denise Malone.
Absolutely, Dr. Malone.
She can tell you her title.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Committee. I'm the Chief of Mental Health and Wellness for Virginia Department of Corrections. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a board-certified behavior analyst, and I love your question, so thank you. Every single person, every single inmate who comes into the Department of Corrections receives a biopsychosocial intake. And at that point, they are given the mental health code that you are referring to. Within the Department of Corrections, we have to provide the entire continuum of mental health care that communities do. So yes, we have everything from outpatient, which we would say is, hey, I would like to talk to mental health at this point in time. I've had something happen. I've had more stressors lately. I could do with maybe attending a group or some individual sessions, up to and including, unfortunately, commitment. But commitment is a mandatory court process, and that's because the person is a danger to self or others, just like it is in the community. So we provide the community standard of care. We just have to do it behind our walls. And you mentioned what is available. So again, we have mental health professionals. This is why I look so tired. We're on call 24/7. All of the major facilities have mental health professionals there. In fact, Red Onion is the best staffed. I don't know that you could see it because it was just one item on the slide, but right now, my mental health and wellness staff at Red Onion has 0 vacancies, and they are the best staffed of the high security facilities, so that's a great thing. So they're available. The inmates can write us a referral, a staff person, and by the way, the most common referral we get is so-and-so ain't right. We don't expect people to be junior psychologists. All we need them to do is to pick up a phone, to give us an email. We make rounds in the building, and yes, based on somebody's mental health code and their current level of functioning and their current risks, we can increase our monitoring, increase our screening, increase our care, and that might include a referral to one of our 5 licensed mental health units. Again, all appearing within the Department of Corrections. And I know I'm going on and on, as Director Dotson will tell you, I could talk for hours about mental health, but here's something I'm incredibly proud of because the director and deputies allowed us to do this. A couple of years ago, we realized self-harm and suicidality is up for the country as a whole, not just for those who are incarcerated. We knew that the pandemic was creating its own unique sense of stressors, increasing depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So we not only are the mental health department, they allowed us to become mental health and wellness. So we are able to do more prevention in triage. So we do walk the rounds of the units. We may just provide somebody with materials that have positivity in them. We refer to thinking of a change. So there may be cognitive behavioral positive materials for somebody also. So we really do, and I can't bring this home enough, we need to look at every individual on a case-by-case basis. And I am proud of my clinicians, and I stand behind them 100%. And I would love the chance to work with the ombudsman, to work with any and all of you on that. And thank you for the opportunity to respond.
Hey, Delegate Cousins, you have a follow-up?
Yes, just one follow-up.
Before you do that, real quick,
Sure.
just
Okay.
for those of you that may not be, and Director Dotson, you've done a great job of this. It's important that everybody direct their comments towards the chair and towards the dais, and we know who you're talking about. It's fine, but if we can avoid conversations back and forth between audience and participants and just try and direct everything through the chair, I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Delegate
Okay,
Cousins.
thank you. So just a quick follow-up question. So in terms of treatment and screening, the screenings that happen, so do incarcerated individuals have to request, like is there some sort of behavior that leads to you doing any subsequent screenings after the first one? Like is it behavior, or can incarcerated individuals request voluntary treatment?
And I apologize for looking around before.
It's all right. It's natural. I just, that's why every now and then I like to remind folks. We all do it.
I apologize. So yes, there can be a request form written or a verbal request by an inmate for services, or as I mentioned, any discipline, or even other inmates can say so-and-so ain't right, which might be what we hear the most often. So again, any form of intervention or treatment is going to be based on the current level of functioning, the current risks and needs of the person. And I also want to say that for every single significant event, we do a root cause analysis. Monthly, we review those in our Mental Health Services Steering Committee. I'm sorry, I'm trying to go fast. And then twice a year, we have a quality management subcommittee of that group, and we look for trends. And at that point, what we will do and have done, will continue to do, is we change our policies and practices based on current clinical standards and trends that we have found not happening at other places, not happening at other places 20 years ago, but happening at Department of Corrections now.
All right. If you don't mind, I'm going to take the chair's prerogative. So it sounds like you're saying is that every time there's an incident, there's a root cause analysis that's done. Are these, I'm just curious, are these medical records, or are they something that's available to the public? In other words, one of the requests we heard, one of the asks we got was to try and see if we can't see if there's a correlation, if not a causation. We do a root cause, but study the lineup between extended periods in isolation and or restriction, whatever you want to call it, and the self-directed violence, if I'm going to adopt y'all's terminology. Is it, because you do that analysis, it sounds like that's data that you guys have relatively easy, you could line those things up relatively easily, is that accurate?
Sir, we do have data available. I also am part of, as my role, part of the ACLU lawsuit. But we do have forms that we are looking at where the individual is housed when events occur. On those forms, because we are clinicians and we are looking for clinical reasons, there is confidential information on those forms. So again, I welcome the chance to work with other folks in coming up with something that could be used, but it would be unethical of me to turn those things over.
Gotcha, I understand. We have to develop a different kind of a tool if we want to do that, is what I'm hearing.
I'm sorry?
We'd have to develop a different kind of a tool.
Correct.
Than what
Yes,
you have.
please.
Thank you. All right, Delegate Siebold.
Thank you, Chairman Simon. Thank you, Director Dotson, for coming in today, and for your team as well. I know I sent you a letter a little while ago, and we said we'd continue this conversation today, so I appreciate your frank answers. Thank you as well for the invite to visit Red Onion. I did visit earlier this year. I feel like I can speak personally to many of the things I heard today. Solitary was much more widespread than the one that you described to us today. In fact, I would say that my observations from my visit are much more aligned with that of the ones described by Ms. Greenspan. Definitely saw shackling, definitely saw a lack of freedom as they walked towards the cages, definitely saw lots of people in those cages. And it was much more that I saw at Wallens Ridge and any other prison that I visited. And so this leads to my first question that I want to ask you. One of the things that seemed to be a common theme in my visit and from what I'm hearing today is that if you behave, you should be released from Red Onion. And it's hard for me to believe that people in these conditions can learn to, quote unquote, behave. They're being locked 20 hours a day, and then their only rec time is in another cage, if they have that. And we've heard stories where they're not even receiving that much. You mentioned and you gave us a list of programs that those in Red Onion are able to access. But it was my understanding when I visited that those programs are specifically for those not in solitary. I saw a library program. I think they're allowed to have one book a week. I saw a GED program, and there was like 6 computers in that room, and I saw a vacuum repair program. And again, this is something at least, but it's not something that those in solitary are able to access. So I'm having a hard time trying to, align both issues where we want them to behave. We want them to be able to earn their way out of Red Onion, but at the same time, we're not giving them any way to do that. So how do you envision expanding these type of rehabilitative programs for people in solitary, particularly when many of these programs I just described are unavailable to them?
Mr. Chair, thank you, and thank you as well for coming down to visit Red Onion. Appreciate that. So there's a couple of things here. Number one, is RHU different at Red Onion than it is at other places? Well, it's going to be different than Lawrenceville, because the individuals incarcerated at Lawrenceville, who we've not had a single fight since we took over state operation in August, are behaving. At some point, there has to be some responsibility on the part of the individuals to get, but we cannot force someone into programming. We can try. We cannot force it. And there are going to be certain individuals that don't want it. To the extent that we need to provide more and better program, I'm always happy to have that conversation. I've said to our programming education team that the data is incredible when you go through education or for a career tech program or something within the department and you're released, the recidivism rates are way down. I want to be able to reach every individual incarcerated with that because it's long-term public safety. There are some issues with people who did not get to Red Onion by accident. They have to want to engage in the behavior as well, the pro-social behavior that's going to improve. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dotson, I want to ask you a quick question. So is it accurate that when you enter you were calling, should I use your terms? I don't want to be pejorative, the restorative housing units, as you guys call them, that you lose your access to the educational programs and the other services that are offered as part of the, I guess your step one, right, is you're taking everything away. Does that include access to the educational programs, access to those other resources? I mean, what's the first thing that happens when somebody gets assigned to a restrictive housing unit? Let me put it that way.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what happens is immediately the multidisciplinary team gets together. That consists of medical, mental health, security team there, programming team to determine what are the steps. How do we get here? How do we get out? And part of that is how do we deliver programming within? Sometimes it can only be journals, for example, some kind of journaling. We do a lot of journaling down there when they're in restorative housing. And I don't know if you want to add any, Mr. Mr. Holloway, could I ask you to sort of add to what, if you don't mind?
Yes, sir, Director. Mr. Chairman, good afternoon, committee members. We have an interesting concept at Red Onion State Prison, and it has moved to other facilities as well. In the restorative housing unit, we have a concept called distant learning. That means that we will bring the educational materials to the inmate while he's in that status. So it's not like he lose an opportunity to continue or get an education if he desires to do so. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Delegate Phillips, you had your light on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Director Dotson. I just want to clarify something. I know we heard from the ACLU representative, and she mentioned solitary confinement. I think we also heard it again from my colleague. Currently, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't practice solitary confinement in Virginia. The International Code, the UN, I heard also mentioned, and so as defined by the UN and the what would solitary confinement be?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Delegate. I couldn't tell you because we don't do it. We are in not just compliance, but we exceed all international standards and American Correctional Association audits.
So solitary confinement would be 22 hours a day. Why do we call it restorative housing in Virginia? What's the difference between that and the International Code?
Well, you get, number one, more out of cell time. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. You get more out of cell time, and you also have access to, it's not just locking someone up in a room and leaving them there, which is what people are thinking of when they hear the term solitary confinement. It's just not, we have a team dedicated to getting you out of there rather than just leaving you there.
And so you get double the time.
Delegate Phillips.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Phillips.
So so basically the difference is the amount of time and the process to get out and the help to get out. So instead of 22 hours a day, it's 20 hours a day. And then you also have additional, programming and things to help people remove themselves from that.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's exactly. And I would note that 4 hours out of cell time, that is codified in the restorative housing law. The Department of Corrections was doing that long before they were required by law to give at least 4 hours. So, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director.
All right, Delegate Clark, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Dotson, for being here today and sharing these insights with us, and thank you to all of the advocates as well. My question is, I had got some numbers from you when you was reading off 776 inmates, and you said about 163 has received signed up for basic education. Adult basic education is about a little over 20%, and then 112 folks for career and tech, about 15%. With distant learning, is those numbers inside of the CNT or the adult basic education, or is that a separate program for distant learning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the question. So CT is a little bit different sometimes in how we can deliver it. Sometimes a little more difficult depending on what we can deliver. Like we can't teach a full welding class through distance learning. So we try to offer as much as we possibly can. We can get into the data for you of exactly what that is. I'm happy to respond with that.
And I have a follow-up.
Delegate Clark.
Thank you. And my follow-up question, thank you, Mr. Chair, is what is the plans for improvement, and is there any programs that you currently don't offer that you are looking to start offering to folks that's in your facility?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, if I may. Thank you for the question. So my basic goal that I deliver to our programming and education team all the time is I want every program at every facility, if we can. If it's going to help someone not reoffend, that's good for long-term public safety. The things that make that difficult sometimes are finding teachers, but with distance learning, that's become less of an issue, and we're working on that. I appreciate the conversation we've had with Virginia Interfaith, who we're upgrading broadband at all of our facilities. Education helps us. We love it. It helps. It's a win-win for everyone. So broadband capability, especially at Red Onion right now, aren't what they need to be. They're going to be soon. Finding teachers is difficult. That's less difficult once we can actually engage in more distance learning, interactive distance learning, like local community colleges. And then I guess the other piece of it is the willingness, a population that wants to take advantage of that. I can't have a class for one person sometimes if I'm going to employ a teacher. I may redirect that. So I think all those things are in the mix, but we're 100% behind efforts to improve access to education to this cohort.
Thank you. Delegate Wilt.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, one of the presenters earlier talked about the step-down program, voiced concerns about it. Could you walk us through, I know you touched on it, but could you walk us through a bit more about, where that came from, the purpose in it, how it's being implemented, what are the results, if there are results?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask Dr. Malone actually to help me on this one with the proviso again that we're currently engaged in litigation that's going to answer all of those questions. So there may be, have to watch sort of what we say, but you want to talk a little bit about the step-down program and its genesis and
then
you know?
I'm thinking Mr. Holloway would help us with that as well.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Go ahead.
Again, Mr. Chairman, good afternoon, committee members. The step-down program, look at the word step down. That is an opportunity, a pathway for an inmate to put himself in a situation to get back to a general population setting. The inception of the step-down program began the process in 2011. I was the warden at Wallens Ridge State Prison. What the concept holds is this: we partner with Red Onion State Prison, Wallens Ridge State Prison, to take inmates that was under an admin segregation status to long-term in that status, no pathway to get to a general population setting. So we established that concept. That is a national phenomenon. The state of Virginia has been recognized by several other states of being an innovative agency moving forward with this process. Several states have come to Virginia to look at that model, and it gives those problematic, at the time, long-term admin segregation inmates a pathway to get out of that status. We equip them with journaling in their cells. We established two apparatus. One was a therapeutic module. That was an individual area that the inmates will go to under the watchful eye of a treatment officer and begin the relationship with other inmates in a defined area to talk about their issues and concerns. Then it will spill into what we call stationary therapeutic chairs that are in the park that the inmates come out and they're able to sit down and have a relationship and begin to develop social skills to move forward in the process. So that's the genesis of the step-down program in Virginia. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right, Delegate Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I would ask Mr. Dodson, I guess, when we start talking about restorative housing, what would be one of the, I guess, the most common cause as to why somebody would end up in restorative housing?
Well, it's behavior-based. They refuse to behave, essentially. So most common, that could be any number of things. There are a number of infractions that could ultimately, over time, land you in that. Mr. Holloway, you want to address what maybe you see as the most common? I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
That's fine.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, committee, the director is correct. It is behavior-driven. A significant fight that a weapon is involved, assaults, attacks gang members against other gang members will put inmate in restorative housing. So those type of significant incidents that's driven by behavior is what puts an inmate into restorative housing.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Whipper.
Thank you. You had mentioned a couple of years ago that we passed legislation that kind of altered what we were doing with restorative housing. How has that changed? And I guess what is the longest someone can get restorative housing at Red Onion? Because we're here because of an issue in Red Onion.
Certainly, and I will say, and that comment was made earlier, that nothing's changed since the law passed. Of course not, because what was codified is what we've already been doing without being told to do it. So first of all, that's why nothing's changed in the last 2 years since the law was passed, because it's a good system and it works. The average length of stay, as I said earlier, ranges 9 days to 2 weeks. The step-down program, the average there would be around 6 months for the step-down program. These are the ones that are most violent. The longest, what's the longest? I don't know the answer to that. Actually, if you don't know the answer, we probably find that and get it back to them.
Yes, sir. I agree with the director, around 2 weeks, but it can go to 30, can go to 45 days. They are reviewed, and if they're meeting the criteria to be released from restorative housing, that's what we will do. Another significant piece of the criteria going into restorative housing, I wanted to mention an assault on staff. An assault on staff. We really look at that closely. No exception, zero tolerance for assault on staff by an inmate.
Got it. So I certainly understand there's a disciplinary aspect to it for sure, and a safety piece of it. I think the disconnect that we seem to be having is, and we may not be able to solve it this afternoon, right? But I think what I'm hearing from some folks is that the conditions that you're putting in folks to sort of, I think the idea is to incentivize people to improve by depriving them of a bunch of stuff, but sometimes that deprivation itself doesn't actually provide that incentive to move forward, but it causes them a downward spiral in the other direction, right? So what can we do to keep people moving in the right direction and not have what we're doing as a corrective measure send them in the wrong direction as far as their mental health and well-being? I think that's, from what I'm hearing, I'm just sort of summarizing. I'm not an expert on this. I don't have a degree in it. Haven't been to the prison yet, but that seems to be a lot of, I think, where the disconnect might be. All right, Delegate Obenshain, and then Delegate Lopez, and then Delegate Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask a question, Director Dodson, about disciplinary offenses, because you mentioned in your presentation, I believe you said that 82% of inmates at Red Onion State Prison have more than 10 disciplinary offenses. And I'm not sure that the members of the committee or folks out here are as acquainted with disciplinary offenses as I have been in my career. And so my question is, when we talk about disciplinary offenses, those are things, correct me if I'm wrong, but those are things, there's kind of a wide range of things that can qualify as disciplinary offenses. From one end, not being in your bunk at a certain time of day or something like that, all the way up to there are types of disciplinary offenses, inmates exposing themselves to staff, inmates spitting on staff, inmates having contraband such as weapons or drugs, and inmates getting in fights and harming others can be dealt with either as a new criminal offense or as a disciplinary offense. Is that an accurate statement of what kind of constitutes disciplinary offenses?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Delegate. So yes, that's a perfectly accurate statement. There's a wide range of things that could be disciplinary infractions. I look at just one of the individuals who, as part of the incident we're talking about here today, started at Greensville possessing a weapon, and then to River North, simple assault upon an offender, spitting, throwing, otherwise transferring of bodily waste fluids. A lot of lewd or obscene acts directed toward or in the presence of another, but also unauthorized use of a telephone or disobeying an order. So it's sort of, and all the way up to actual criminal offenses for which we have relationships with every Commonwealth attorney in every jurisdiction where we have facilities to seek indictment on those when, for example, it rises to the level of what should be indicted. So, and I'm just looking at this over I have 3.5 pages full of just every fighting, disobeying an order, fighting, lewd or obscene acts, tampering with equipment, security equipment. So there are a number of infractions.
Mr. Chairman, if I may follow up.
Okay, we can have a quick follow-up. I think we're willing to stipulate that these are bad guys, right? That have done bad things, let's put it that way, right? And present a danger, and that's how they get there in the first place. I think some what we're trying to figure out is again, what we do with them once they're there to makes them better, not worse. But go ahead, Mr. Delegate Openshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to clarify one thing that you said in your presentation about I think you said the median number of infractions for inmates at Red Onion was 33, and I was curious as to whether that was a number that is like overall or just at that institution or what that kind of covers, where that number comes from.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Delegate. That's just the Red Onion number. It was, on average, inmates at Red Onion have 33 convictions for disciplinary offenses. And essentially what you'll see is, and we can get the data if anyone here is interested in it, as we move up levels, the number of disciplinary infractions obviously go down, as it makes sense, because those are the inmates that are behaving well and able to move up to lower classifications.
Thank you, Mr. Dotson. Thank you for your willingness to stand here and answer questions from us. We have three more folks in the queue, and then we'll move on to maybe hear a little bit from the ombudsman and then from some public comment. So Delegate Lopez, followed by Delegate Clark, followed by Delegate Siebold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just two quick questions, Delegate Director Dotson. In the presentation you put forward, it said that there were recent incidents of self-harm were 6 inmates. Can you define what just recent incidents are?
Well, since March.
What's the time frame? So just since March of this year.
Apologize, Mr. Chairman. Yes, that's since March.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. According to the DOJ, restrictive housing is 22 months, or 22 hours in the day. And then restorative housing, as we define it in the Commonwealth, is 20 hours with supports about how to get out of restorative housing. Maybe this isn't a question for you, but for the head of psychiatric services. What do we know, and what is the research we're using to say that 20 hours over a long period of time, say 6 months, as has been raised here, at what point do you start seeing that spiral that the chairman referred to, that spiral in terms of mental health impacts, that spiral that moves an inmate away from taking positive steps to it actually all devolving?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I may ask Dr. Moon to come up, but and I presume she'll correct me if I'm incorrect here, because she has a habit of doing that. But there is, as far as I know, literally no evidence that restorative housing, as we manage it, has these spiral effects the way we do it. It does for solitary confinement. We can maybe agree on that, but we're talking past each other in this conversation. Dr. Moon, do you want to?
Chair?
Yes.
There is no set formula, if you will. There is no algorithm of how many hours is for good mental health or medical health. What I will say is the shoe syndrome that people keep referring to their research, there's a variety of studies, some of them based back to the Nazi experiments or when college students were put in boxes and deprived of sensory stimulation in the 60s. There is not definitive evidence-based research that shows that there is automatically going to be a decompensation medically or mental health-wise. But we don't want anyone to get worse. We don't want anybody to be quietly ill or to get quietly sicker, which is why we have the supports, which is why we have the rounds, which is why we have the monitoring and more screening, and we change our strategies based on case-by-case basis and what we're seeing with these inmates. So there is no set algorithm.
Got it. Thank you. I understand. And all right, so Delegate Clark and Delegate Siebold, and then we're going to sort of round up this piece of it. Delegate Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is going back to the step-down program. I had got a number that it was 397 inmates that was in that program. That's over 50% of your population. And I also believe in the step-down program that a lot of your other programs, such as educational and different things, aren't offered while they're in that process. So I guess my question is, what is the average rate among other facilities that's using the step down? Is it around that same 50% or more of inmates that's going through that?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have that number for you. I will get it to every member of the committee this afternoon.
Thank you. Delegate Siebel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Dotson, what steps are being taken to ensure that incarcerated people who do raise concerns about their conditions, especially at Red Onion, are not subject to retaliation or further punishment?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman, Delegate. So, first of all, show me the evidence of someone being retaliated against. I want to know that, okay? It's not acceptable, and it's not tolerated in my department. But I think, again, this is a good example of what we're talking about here. Every member of this committee, I think, got an email talking about how we were retaliating against one of the individuals who did the self-harm by trying to transfer him out of state, to shut him up. That inmate, I've got the body cam video to show it, came to ask to be moved, and then immediately, within hours, everybody gets a blast email that we're trying to retaliate. What I would say is we need to know when there is evidence, when there are allegations, and I want to investigate every single one of them, because it's not, I'll tell you now, it's not any retaliation. No retaliation is proper. I need some evidence of when it's happening so I can stop it.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dotson. I think I hear your comment that we're talking past each other. I think I'd like not to, right? And I think one of the things that we've heard from advocates as well is can we gather, I don't know if we call it evidence or just information, right? What y'all have said, what I've heard you say, I think, is that we don't do solitary confinement, and so therefore we don't have many of the negative follow-ons that result from solitary confinement. Yet, we were here a year ago talking about folks that were on a hunger strike, which is, again, a form of self-directed violence or self-harm. We now are here talking about a group of inmates that have burned themselves in some way, shape, or form. So the incidents continue to happen. And again, I hear your explanation that you're going to, a group of 6 is relatively insignificant. You're always going to sort of have a group of folks that are unhappy with being held accountable and will act out. But what I'd love to see if maybe the ombudsman can come forward, having listened to all of this, and tell us if there's anything here that their office is maybe capable of sinking their teeth into. Maybe we can gather some of that information that was requested. Is there a relationship between these incidents of self-harm and time spent in restorative or step-down housing? How can we sort of line up those statistics? Can we get some of that information? Can we get an investigation into these, again, claims of retaliation and so forth? So I don't know if the ombudsman's office is here, if you guys wouldn't mind coming forward, maybe addressing some of that. And then telling us maybe what, if anything, the process would be to kick that piece of it off.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Mike Westphal, State Inspector General for the Commonwealth of Virginia. The legislation that was passed and the governor signed became effective July 1st, creating the Office of the DOC Ombudsman within our office. So I'm not the ombudsman, but we have gone through an extensive hiring process that actually involved the co-chairs of the Corrections Oversight Committee, Senator Marsden and Delegate Arnold. And we brought on board Andrea Sapone, over here. She is the Corrections Ombudsman. She came on board September 25th, so she's been with us about a month and a half. And during that time, we just actually had our first Corrections Oversight Committee meeting last Friday, Friday the 13th, and she presented an update on what she has accomplished so far. And primarily what we're doing right now is developing our internal policies and procedures. We are required to operate an inmate and family member complaint line, so we're in the process of setting that up. And we're also required to do inspections of all approximately 40 or so facilities on a 1 to 3 year cycle. So to do that, we were provided 6 individuals. She's the first one. We're in the process of hiring 5 additional corrections oversight specialists. We've made an offer to 1. We're hoping to have a few more on board here shortly. And we are also hoping to start our inspection process in January of each facility. So I guess I just want to lay out that this is new to us as well. I will also say that I've been with the agency for almost 10 years, and we have, during that time, we received probably about 5 to 10 inmate letters or correspondences from family members or inmates every week, and we have processed those. We have a good working relationship with DOC through that process and working with their, I'm going to use the incorrect terminology because they've recently changed the name, but their special investigations unit that is responsible for looking into this, and their human rights folks as well that look into some of these things. All that being said, I think there is some work we could do in this area. What that is would definitely need to be fleshed out and probably involve folks from other units within our office. Right now we have a total of 46 positions to ensure that the work gets done timely, because right now, again, we have one person. Happy to let these folks introduce themselves and answer any questions y'all may have.
Yeah, that'd be great. I understand, you guys are getting started and there's work to be done and some more hiring to happen. But yeah, if we could, except one thing everybody agreed on is, hey, we've got a new ombudsman's office. Isn't this exactly that kind of thing? So if you all wouldn't mind introducing yourselves and just telling us a little bit, and then I think we can probably get together also with the co-chairs of the oversight committee and see if we can't come up with a plan to address some of the things we've heard today.
Sounds great. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Corrine Loudon. I'm the Chief Deputy Inspector General. I'm actually the liaison for our Corrections Oversight Committee, and that's the group that met last Friday. But Andrea right here is our ombudsman, so I'll let you.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrea Sapone, the new ombudsman for the Office of the State Inspector General. I'm happy to be here, excited to be here, and curious.
All right. When did you start?
I started September 25th of this year.
Gotcha. So you've been a few months. All right. Anybody have any specific questions? I think you had a lot. Delegate Hope.
Thank you, and I'm over here. Welcome to investigating the Department of Corrections, which I've been doing this for 15 or 16 years, and I think we've had quite a few name changes for what we've called isolation. We've come a long way, and so I want to thank you for taking this on. I want to ask you whether you can first prioritize the investigation of Red Onion and going in and sort of giving us an objective, unbiased perspective of what's going on inside Red Onion. And my next question would be, how do you plan to do that? Can you interview staff? Can you interview inmates, the leadership, warden, et cetera, there to get to the bottom of this investigation? So if you can just sort of go through the dynamics of how you would have an investigation and what that process might look like.
Sure, great question. I think as part of any investigation, the first step is receiving the information. So as detailed as possible, as much detail, who it involves, where it happened, when it happened, were there any witnesses, and the plan for a good investigation is going to be to speak to the victim, speak to any witnesses, speak to DOC staff, and any other person pertinent to the investigation to get the information. It can also include pulling records, body-worn camera footage, anything else that the DOC can offer for us to complete a rounded investigation.
Mr. Chair. Delegate Hope. My question also was, can you prioritize this Red Onion?
The Office of the State Inspector General takes all allegations of abuse seriously. So Red Onion investigation will be prioritized as soon as we have a full staff to do it correctly.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good answer. All right. We have, unless there are any other questions, we have some folks queued up for public comment. So do we have anybody here? First, let's see, is there anybody here in the live audience? If we could have you guys line up if you'd like to come and speak. If we can put a 2-minute timer on each speaker. If you guys plan for more than that, let me know, but if we could try and do this in about 2 minutes each, 2 or 3 minutes each, that would be great. And then we'll get to some folks that are online as well. So please introduce yourself and go ahead.
Good afternoon, committee, and thank you for this hearing. My name is Natasha White, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Interfaith Action for Human Rights. Just last year, with the help of Mundane King, Delegate Hope, Delegate Cole, we introduced a bill that would limit restrictive housing to 15 days, and it actually passed both houses. So we know that there's solitary here. I want to clear up two things. I heard Chad Dotson say that other states have limited the use of solitary and the violence has gone up. I'm 4 of those states representative. That is not the truth. Not only has the violence not gone up, but money has been saved. But we're talking about human beings here, right? I also noticed that when the representative from DOC that works for mental health said the word people, she corrected herself and then said inmates. We're talking about people. People are setting themselves on fires to get some relief. This is not an isolated incident. It happens in the majority of the supermax prisons, to the point where New York State stopped years ago from sending their incarcerated population to Wallens Ridge and Red Onion because they were dying. We get calls. I get calls from people's mothers screaming their children are being killed, mysterious deaths. This is not a secret to the abuses of Red Onion. None of us should be shocked. It's isolated. It's in an area where nobody can, focus on their family or rehabilitation. How can you, we keep hearing solitary confinement and we keep comparing it to the amount of time in a cell. But because you're moved out of the cell into a cage and you're still by yourself, it's still isolation. There's numerous studies that claim and show and prove the effects of solitary confinement. And we just need to be honest with ourselves and realize that we're hurting our own population by not holding DOC accountable and giving people the programs and the progress and the opportunity to become better citizens. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am a concerned citizen. I ask for a moment of silence to those who have lost their lives and who have been injured or harmed by hate. We'd like to address the concerns about the data that has been compiled, where there are researchers within the department of an organization, the data is likely to be skewed. And so I will ask General Assembly to consider that the information that has been provided today needs to be questioned. And those who will in the future be questioned, their safety needs to be questioned. For those individuals who experienced this tragic incident, it is all too familiar. I like to draw attention to a moment in time where his story was a relevant story, a time when we were enslaved, a time when we were not considered to be completely human, 3/5 to be exact, a time when it was acceptable for human beings to be treated like trash, like roadkill, a time where we were victims of a brutal crime. This time was not too far ago for us not to draw attention to it, because what is happening at Red Onion Prison is a tragedy that is very similar. And we need to be reminded of that every day, that people are treated with hate because they are considered criminals. But let us all be reminded that not everyone who is locked up and shackled has actually committed a crime. And so before we draw labels on people, on human beings, let us first treat each other with dignity and allow ourselves to be accountable for our actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Phil Willeto. I'm editor of the Virginia Defender newspaper, which broke the story of the self-burnings at Red Onion. We received a report from Kevin Rashid, a prisoner journalist at Red Onion, about up to 8 men burning themselves in an attempt to get transferred out of Red Onion because of the conditions there. We tried to interest the Richmond Times-Dispatch and Radio IQ in the story. They said it was hearsay. They couldn't do anything with it, so we did our own investigation and wrote a story that's on the front page of our current edition. That was picked up by the Latin Times, and their story caught the attention of the Legislative Black Caucus, which issued a statement calling for an investigation, and Director Dotson responded to the Black Caucus by saying that every member of the General Assembly, and particularly the Black Caucus, is invited to go to Red Onion, talk to the prisoners, and investigate the situation for themselves. That was about 10 days ago. No one's gone since. Every member of the General Assembly has the right at any time to go into any prison or jail in the state of Virginia at any time. But as a former state senator once told me, Phil, you have to understand these people don't vote. Either Mr. Dotson is correct in saying that anyone who self-immolated at Red Onion has a mental health issue and is being dealt with, and that's the end of it. And if you come up and look at the facility yourself, you'll see they're doing a golden job. We have been receiving letters from Red Onion for 22 years, and either hundreds of prisoners have gotten together and gotten their stories straight, or what Mr. Dotson is saying is incorrect. Why are guards with white supremacist tattoos allowed to work at Red Onion Prison and walk up to black prisoners and display their neo-Nazi tattoos and then threaten their lives? You can disappear and no one will ever know what happened to you. This is the prison that kept Nicholas Reyes, a Salvadoran immigrant, in solitary confinement for 13 years. And he couldn't use the step-down program because the forms he was supposed to fill out were in English, and he's illiterate even in his native Spanish. He was eventually given a cash settlement of $115,000. That works out to $1 a day. By the time he got out of solitary, he couldn't speak. He couldn't recognize his mother. He's not the only one. When we get these complaints, we don't assume everyone is correct. We're journalists. We investigate. And when we talk about cases like Mr. Reed's, it's cases that have been settled in court. This is the problem. Whether it's the Corrections Oversight Committee or the Public Safety Committee or the new Ombudsman's program, which after a year is not even set up and functioning, or the Office of Inspector General, or any member of the General Assembly, none of you have any power to change anything at Red Onion or any other prison. You can't walk into the prison and say, this guard, I just saw him spit into the food tray of a prisoner and he has to go. You can't do that. You can't get rid of Warden David Anderson, who told me personally that no one had burned themselves at Red Onion. I spoke with 3 of the men who said they burned themselves, and every one of them said the reason was they couldn't stand living there anymore in Red Onion and they would rather die. Ekong Elliott, who put grease on his leg and set it off with some kind of a coil, I guess attached to an electrical device, and timed himself for 1 minute and 7 seconds because he wanted to be sure he burnt himself enough so he could be transported 374 miles to the VCU Health burn unit, which is the closest burn unit. And they know that. Someone did it a year ago and they got out of Red Onion that way. This wasn't an act of stupidity or self-hatred or mental health illness. It was a calculated attempt to get out of that hellhole. Now here's the problem.
Sir, if you could wrap up, please.
30 seconds?
Go ahead.
What do you do if you're a prisoner at Red Onion and you are mistreated? Who do you talk to? Who do you complain to? What if they take away your right to use JPay email service? What if they take away your phone or your tablet, as they did to Kevin Rashid Johnson, who blew the whistle on the self-burnings. What do? You're under the complete and utter control of people who may be perfectly decent or maybe white supremacist, brutal racists. There is no outside oversight of Red Onion. It's your responsibility to correct that situation. And the days are ticking by, and the invitation by Mr. Dotson is starting to get stale, and someone has to go to Red Onion. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we've got 5 people in the queue online? No, just that. Oh, just one? Oh, just 2. Gotcha. So who do we have? We have, Allison Chalin. If you can go ahead and introduce yourself and begin your testimony. Oh, we can't hear you.
So, you can't hear me?
Oh, we can now. Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay. Go ahead.
No worries. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Public Safety. I'm Allison Chafin, and I do volunteer work for a nonprofit, but today I'm coming to speak as a loved one of someone incarcerated at Red Onion State Prison for the past 2.5 years. And I'd like to advise the committee of the inhumane conditions at the facility that I have firsthand knowledge of. This meeting has been very heavy. I'm just going to be transparent that I am nervous to speak because of retaliation, and I understand that the department states they don't have tolerance for that. So I wasn't going to say his name, but I will on record just in case. And my loved one's name is Tavon Bailey. Recently, he was placed in solitary confinement for over 20 days. And during one of those phone calls when he was back there, I overheard officers beating another individual, his screams echoing in the background as pepper spray went under my loved one's cell door, leaving him choking and struggling to breathe. This is only one example of the abuse he and others face daily. It is also important to note that this individual that was being beaten has mental health diagnosis. I like to name several harsh, degrading, and inhumane conditions at this facility. Lights remain on in the cells for 17 hours, minimal access to sunlight, recreation being very limited, often inside, excessive lockdowns among the torture of solitary confinement. The facility is infested with mold and mail isn't handled correctly. A year ago, Kevin Rashid Johnson nearly died after a 70-plus day hunger strike, protesting these same conditions. The mental and physical abuse, excessive lockdowns, and lack of adequate medical care push people to their breaking points and have caused self-harm to feel like their only options. The department has a hands-off approach to these remote facilities because they're so far away. They rely on reports from the local captains, majors, and wardens who have been overseeing this abuse for years. This disconnect allows the department to ignore the real suffering. The toll of this crisis doesn't just end behind the walls, it ripples outward to us families like mine, to the children like my loved one's young son who barely gets to talk to his father because of the excessive lockdowns. I can't sleep at night because I'm terrified the next call will be that he's gone. Please, I implore you to act with this and hold the accountability and end the use of long-term solitary confinement. Ensure these prisons operate under humane constitutional conditions. I'd like to end by saying that my loved one doesn't have 30-something violent charges. He's actually incarcerated for 3 and only 1 violent charge of robbery. And I'd like to also say the stigma of the worst is at Red Onion. I get tired of that narrative because my loved one in general, he's a human and he's a father and he's a son and he's also a brother. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up is April Wright. That's right. Looks like you're calling in, so I don't think we can put your camera on, but if you're able to unmute yourself. Are we able to unmute Ms. Wright from here? There she is. Ms. Wright.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So my son was recently in Red Onion. My son hung himself 2 times. He is now in Marion, but the fight for Red Onion is not done for me. My son arrived there about a year ago, and his weight, 40 pounds in 2 months. He wasn't being weighed properly. He was given ghost trays. The guards think it's funny, you know, to see my son starving behind a door, and he has no way to get out from there. He has no way to call for help. Before that, he was at Wallens Ridge. He burned his leg so bad, they never gave him medical treatment, only one time. He was supposed to get skin grafts done. It's been over a year, and he's not received any other medical attention for it. He got moved from Wallens Ridge to Red Onion, which was, it's been worse. I contacted everybody, emails to everybody. I couldn't get nobody to answer my emails. Mr. Dotson, anybody, nobody. This is a sad situation. And if my son dies, everybody that I send emails to, they all know that I let them know this is what's going on in the facility. And if you can't do something about it, this is the reason why there's so many lawsuits. It's sad that our government is allowing this to continue. It's got to stop. These are men. If I did this to a dog, I would be locked up in jail. These are human beings, every single one of them. My son is in there for an unlawful wounding, for an attempt to possess a drug, and for a violation of probation. That's why my son is in Red Onion. So they're saying how many charges? They need to rethink what they're speaking about, because it's not truthful at all. And I'm not stopping. I'm going to keep this going because there's other men in there who are calling me. That's the only reason why I knew that my son hung himself, was because another inmate contacted me, not even the prison itself.
Thank you, Ms. Wright.
Thank you for letting me talk.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. All right. So we're out of folks to speak. I think what we heard from the Ombudsman's office is they were going to make an investigation into Red Onion a priority. We need to, if you guys need any help, staffing up, getting the resources necessary, filling things out, please let us know. Is there anybody else from the committee that wants to be recognized before we adjourn? Delegate Munden King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a brief comment, and my apologies to those in the room who may have seen me go back and forth between two committees today. But what I did hear was extremely alarming. I won't belabor my opinion on solitary confinement, because that's what it is, because I've been pretty clear on that committee that I think is cruel and inhumane. But I want to say that the punishment is supposed to be confinement, not torture. We don't chop your hand off if you steal. We sentence you to confinement. And, you know, there are very different perspectives. As the wife of a law enforcement officer and someone who works in jails, I greatly appreciate the dedication of those who do. But I also understand something my grandmother taught me a long time ago. If it's one person, okay. If it's two people, maybe. By the third time, it's you. And you need to do some work. And clearly we have some work to do to keep people safe, including the officers who also suffer witnessing some of the cruel and inhumane treatment of other human beings. And so thank you, Mr. Chair, and this committee for hearing everyone today. And thank you to the Ombudsman for prioritizing this.
Thank you. And like I said, don't expect to get this problem solved today in one afternoon and one hearing, but I do think we've made some progress. To the folks that are have spoken out with their frustration, right, that this seems to be a recurring theme and nothing seems to happen. It seems to repeat itself. I understand and empathize with that frustration, and I hope that we can, using this new tool of the Ombudsman's Office for Independent Investigations, see if we can't break the cycle and break the pattern and get to some objective information about what's happening and come up with some positive solutions. And I appreciate Director Dodson's willingness and to be here and his commitment to address things that are going wrong and make things better for the people in our custody. So we have more work to do. and we're committed to doing it, and I look forward to seeing you all in session when we start in January. With that, the committee will rise.